Welcome to Sia Najad Sports. My name is Sia Najad, and look who I have with me today. It's none other than Greg DuCharme at The Real GFD. Greg, how's it going?
Sia, I couldn't be better. So thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really excited to do this with you. I think this seems like a really cool venture you got, and I'm proud of you. I'm excited for you, and I'm honored that you would think of me to have me on here with you. So I'm really excited.
So, yeah, a couple things. I think, most people don't know what this is all about. I tweeted something out, Greg, I don't know, 10 minutes ago. And I was like, hey, Greg and I are going to have a conversation. Most people who follow me know who you are, Greg. And we're going to have a conversation, and it's going to be, outside of sports. And listen, I have a character limit on Twitter. I can't really explain exactly what's going on here. But for those of you that are joining the show or listening to this interview later, this is one of those situations where I wanted to do something, Greg. I've always kind of been involved in sports, whether it's with Sirius XM, which I joined you the other day for that. Thank you for the invite there. Or whether
Of
with CBS
course.
Sports, the First Cut Pod, you name it. It's always sports related, and that's fine. But I feel like people like yourself and myself and people that I'm going to have on this show have a little bit more to offer. And listen, that's just, we always kind of get pigeonholed in certain places, but I felt like, well, maybe I'll start this website, sianajadsports.com, and maybe it will be a home for interviews like this where we kind of talk to each other, but we're really talking to other people about, hey, how do we hone in on our goals? How do we persevere through failure, persevere through hard times? And maybe we can kind of talk through, not just you and me, but all the other guests I have on this show, talk through like some really practical tools and steps we can kind of carry with us and to move forward, and not just us, but really anybody. So that's why I wanted you on the show, because when we're on the First Cut together, it's been more than a couple occasions where you've talked about a lot of, like, whether you want to call it self-help or motivational books or podcasts or things like that, that you kind of associate yourself with, you immerse yourself in. So are there certain platforms or podcasts or books that are kind of go-to that you listen to?
Yes, many. So first of all, you mentioned Sirius XM, which I do a lot of work on Sirius XM. Primarily, I'm on a show every morning called A New Breed of Golf. That's from 8 to 10 on Sirius XM. And that is a golf show. This is why I think this idea is so great, Sia, because this is a show about golf. But we start every show with something called the Word of the Day. Michael Breed is the host, and this was his idea, and he brought me on a while ago, and we've been coming up with words and having discussions on what the word of the day is going to be. And our background is in golf instruction, and we're coaches by nature, and Michael's my mentor. I've learned everything I know about coaching from him. Well, not everything, but most of it. Pretty much everything that I teach is learned through him. And the thing that's so interesting to me is golf instruction, playing the game of golf, has so much more to do with what happens in your mind. It's what you do in your head. That's why this connection between sports and motivational stuff works so well, because athletes want to improve and we want to find ways to get better. So that's the primary place where I get a lot of the motivational material that I think about, that I talk about, that I try to practice. It comes from that show. But then additionally, this is another inspiring aspect, things that we talk about on A New Breed of Golf. You gotta read, right? Reading is one of the ways to expand your mind. It's probably the best way to expand your mind. And so I read books all the time. I try to read every day. I kind of have a rule. I try to read at least 4 chapters in a week. That's the minimum. So if I can read at least 4 chapters in a week, then I figure in a month I'll probably have at least a book, if not a book and a half, done. And if there are quiet weeks, I'll read more than 4 chapters a week. And in the very busiest weeks of my life, I'll get 4 chapters in. So some of the books that I've read recently, they are my current study is on habits. So I've read a couple of books on habits, which there's such a great connection to the game of golf in them. And I really, the more I read, the more I believe the connection of habits and anything that you try to do, anything you try to accomplish, anything you are trying to attain that's something new, it goes through the creation or the changing of your habits. So I've read books like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. That's just fantastic. A must-read book. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I've also read, or I'm reading actually right now, Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is just phenomenal. And then the other thing that I think ties really nicely with habits is discipline. This also ties really nicely with sports. It ties nicely with working out, with physical fitness. It ties nicely with business. It ties nicely, I believe, with everything that you want to do. So when I wanted to study discipline, these are kind of the 2 kicks I'm on right now, habits and discipline, which I think go really well together. And well, my thought was, well, who are the most disciplined people in the world? And I thought, well, probably Navy SEALs. So I read a couple of military angled books. They're not strictly about the military, but I read Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And that actually, the first one I mentioned, Extreme Ownership, led me to a podcast I listen to all the time called the Jocko Podcast, where they talk about military, they talk about leadership. One aspect I really like is they actually, Jocko reads books on the podcast. So he's reading and then applying his own thoughts and principles to it. And many of these things are military stories. Some of them are absolutely horrifying stories. Some of them are very uplifting stories. Some of them are motivating. They cover all various, I mean, he's read Shakespeare on this. And the concept of the book and his messaging, it's applying the principles that he learned in leadership through the Navy SEALs to your everyday life, to business, to leadership in that sense. And it's really captivating. And the last thing I'll say on this, Sia, the more I read, the more I listen to this kind of stuff, the more involved I get with it, and the more I try to apply it, the more I see the principles really stand out. And there are certain things that are absolutely paramount in making change in your life, accomplishing your goals, and getting better.
So I think, there's so much you said there. By the way, David Goggins is a guy I make a stop on YouTube somewhere at some point of the day, and I listen to, or maybe Instagram, whatever it is, and I listen to some David Goggins among other people. I'm trying to remember. Eric something is kind of one of the newer guys in town. I'm forgetting his last name, but the thing that just struck me at the end of what you said was applying it. So here's the thing: when we have a goal, or when we have something that we just want to do, whether it's a goal or not, just something we have to do, we get really excited about the theory of doing it. We get really excited about the idea of accomplishing it. I think the problem is, and it's sad but true, the problem is taking that theory, taking that idea and actually applying it to your life. You can read a book and be like, hey man, that's a great idea. I should do that. I'm going to do that. But then the next day you don't do it, and you fall into, to your point about habits, you fall into your bad habit of either procrastinating or putting it off or making excuses for yourself that, hey, that's just not for me. Like, I thought it was a good idea, but the way my life is situated, I don't think I can accomplish that. And I think that's everybody's biggest problem. I genuinely do. It's they have a great idea and they think they can move forward with it, but a day passes, a week passes, a month passes, and in their mind, quote, life takes over. And they just don't do it. And they apply reasons as to why they don't accomplish something. But those reasons, you can cross that word out and just write excuses, right? Because that's ultimately what it is. So you're so well read when it comes to this. And my question for you is, well, for somebody who comes across that light bulb idea, in your mind, how do you get that person, not you specifically, but if you were mentoring somebody, how do you get that person to create the habits so that they can apply it to their everyday life?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And it leads to, a lot of different discussions. But the first thing that you have to do, this is paramount. First and foremost is the other side of reading is writing. And so when you write it down, it adds this connection. It adds a connection of accountability. So one of the 3 major habits in my life I think has been the most successful, and again, it hasn't gone on for a very long period of time yet, so I'm no expert in the matter. My plan is to keep it going for the rest of my life, but I've already seen the incredible things that it does. But writing is this second approach. And you could argue it's the first, but you have to write it down. And when you start writing it down, it adds this layer of accountability to yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, earlier, see, I was talking about discipline and how I've been reading a lot about it and trying to apply it in my own life. And the definition of discipline to me is doing what you tell yourself you're going to do. Maybe that's the definition of self-discipline. Can you do what you tell yourself you're going to do? And so there are a few keys to this. One, if there's not a real capability of you doing it, well, don't commit to it. It's okay to write something down, put it aside, and do it in a time where your schedule allows. For instance, let's say you want to run a marathon, but you just had twin babies. Well, it probably isn't a great time to go start running a marathon. But if you make your plans, if you take steps each day, even while you have twin newborns at home, you can get yourself ready for the time when they're a little bit older and you have more time to train. You can prepare yourself mentally. You can prepare yourself emotionally. You can make plans for what the actual event is. But that comes from writing it down. And when you write it down, it connects the idea to something tangible, to something that's on paper, and it actually connects in your mind. So I have a daily journal that I write in every day, and I record my workout. I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for,
Wow.
which
that's perfect, because
Yeah.
the gratitude part people completely miss. They dismiss it altogether. And we'll get to that in a
Yeah.
second. But okay, you
Yeah.
keep the journal. You have 3 things you're thankful for. Keep going.
Yeah. And then the last thing is what I call today's thoughts. And this is, it gives me kind of a free area to write whatever I want. It's often what I read about in a book. So I read something at night. In the morning, I get my workout in, and then when I write, it's still fresh in my mind. So I have this time where I sleep, I work out, I'm thinking about the things that I read the night before, and then I put them to paper. So there's more than just, I wrote it down. I made a little note in the margin of this book that I'm reading. No, I took this time to process it, contemplate the information. If I have to go back to the book and check a quote and refresh myself, I will. But oftentimes, just the way that you process it is what makes it yours. It's what makes it real. And, you'll hear some of the things I say tonight will, if you've read any of the books that I'm referring to, it may sound like plagiarism. That's not the intent, but I've tried my best to internalize a lot of the things that I've read through my own writing. And so in a way, they become your own ideas. And I'm not saying that you should go out and take other people's ideas. I'll do my best to credit whenever I do, but it can actually become a part of your fabric. It can become a part of what you are, who you are. It can become a part of your daily routine. And when it becomes a part of your daily routine, the action takes over. Yeah. And then there's one last piece of this. And this is something I read very recently about habits. It was a line it's actually in the book I'm reading right now, Atomic Habits, a home for every habit. And this is the idea that the environment is really important. So when you are building a habit, you need to have a place for it and you need to have a time for it. It's in The Power of Habit as well, where they have done studies, countless studies, where people who are trying to accomplish a goal, let's say the example in The Power of Habit is people going through physical therapy after like a big car accident or something. And they know they're going to have these moments where it's really difficult to do what their PT told them to do, go for a walk because it hurts. And they found that the people with the most success, they actually wrote down a very descriptive plan for what they were going to do when they got in that difficult situation. And then in Atomic Habits, they talk about this implementation plan where you say at this time I'm going to do X in this location. So after I wake up, I'm going to work out in my basement. And now you've connected a place and a time for that new habit. So when you come across a really big idea, something that's that's new that you want to really do, you want to implement into your life, you got to make sure that there's a place, a time in your day where you can add that in.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do that, Sia, like I did it with my physical fitness. I work very long hours. My show, like I said, with the show I'm on in the morning is at 8:00. I get to work at 7. I got to leave at 6:30. I got to be in the shower at 6. But there's not a lot of time to work out in the morning. I have 2 kids at home. My evenings and a lovely wife. I don't really want to be at the gym during my evenings. I also do the First Cut podcast with you. I a post game show on Sirius XM. A lot of my evenings are really full. So that means I guess I can't work out. Well, no, you can do it. You just need a time and a place for it. So my time is before I have to get up at, before 5:00 in the morning. I have to get myself ready, depending on the workout. It may be 4:40, it may be 4:30, it may be 4:50, somewhere in that time frame. I got to get up and do my workout in my basement. And when I go through that step, all of a sudden it has a time, it has a place.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to put things on top. Well, after I work out, now I'm going to write my quick journal entry. And then I'm going to shower and get ready for work. And all these things start to spiral in a good direction, in a positive direction. Instead of, well, I'm going to sit on the couch, I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to open a beer and open a bag of potato chips, right? They can spiral in good and bad directions because certain things that you do have a time and a place.
Yeah. And I think that, I think this goes back to the accountability part, because a lot of times, again, back to the whole, I really want to accomplish this thing. It's a great idea. And then 2 weeks later, it's completely off your mind because you've made up a bunch of excuses. And by the way, yeah, you have a pretty full life with the 2 kids. You're married, of course. You've got the Sirius XM, long hours. I mean, so you have to hold yourself accountable. Finding a time and a place is so important. And here's why. The idea is abstract. It is completely abstract in terms of the steps you need to take to accomplish whatever that goal is until you actually put it in somewhere in your daily routine. And people, it's such a simple thing for me to say, but people don't understand it. And for the record, guilty as charged. Like that's happened to me before too, if not recently, where I'm like, I really want to do that. And it just kind of leaves my mind and I make up excuses as to why I can't do it. If I do what you just said, and actually find a time and a place for it and create that habit, well, then now it's a part of my day. It's not an excuse any longer. It's just part of the fabric of my day. Right. I love the accountability aspect.
There's one other aspect you mentioned there, right? If it has to become, when it has to become a part of your day, it also means you can't do everything. Right. There's only so much time in a day. We know that. And so when things have a time and a place, there are things that are reasonable to do and things that are unreasonable to do. So this I also find to be extremely effective. You have to make sure that your goals and the things that you add in there are attainable, or at least certain steps are attainable. Like, let's take, for instance, you want to, just to use the working out example. It would be one thing for me to say, I want to be an Olympic power lifter. Well, that's not really a very realistic thing. But, if I want to be able to do a set of 50 push-ups or a set of 20 pull-ups, that is a reasonable goal. It'll take some time, but the key is now I'm going to apply during the time that I have. I'm going to make sure that I'm just doing it. I'm working towards that every single day. And I'm not going to set a strict, time limit. I'm going to do 50 push-ups by the end of next week. If I can only do, 23, that's not a very productive thing. And it's something that I came across in my career as a golf professional, which I still am a golf professional. But as a golf professional, you don't have a ton of time to work on your own game. So when you try to make changes to your game, you have to take the time that's given to you. You have to take the time that's available, and it doesn't allow for rapid change. You're not a tour player. You may study tour players, you may talk to tour players, you may try to think like tour players, but you're not going to improve at the rate that they are because of the amount of time that they can put in. So you have to make sure that you're the goals you're trying to reach match the amount of time you're willing to give to it. And when you do that, it gives you this great sense of accomplishment where, like, for instance, in my physical fitness, which is very, very low key, I wouldn't even tell you what routine is because it's so uninspiring. But the win for me is that I do it every day, right? That I have accomplished a streak of a certain number of days, and the longer that goes on, that becomes the win. And there may be mini goals in there. I want to do 50 push-ups in a set. I want to do 20, and it'll go on from there. But the goal isn't to do 50 push-ups in a set. The goal is to work out every day. The goal is to be somebody who's physically fit. And I think that's a really important distinction when you're breaking down how much time you have versus what the goals you have are.
Eric David in the chat, a good friend of mine. Achievable or attainable is one of the components of SMART goals. Critical! Exclamation point. Let me take you back. Thanks, Eric, for watching, by the way. The gratitude part. So I'll tell you, I'm going to have David Meltzer on this very show on March 1st. I'm trying to remember what time he's going to be on the show. But for those of you that don't know David Meltzer, and Greg, I'm not sure if you know him, but just look for him on Twitter, Instagram. It's literally at David Meltzer. One of the most giving, gracious people I've ever met, extremely well connected, like hundreds of thousands of followers, entrepreneur, former NFL agent, just a motivational speaker. I mean, he really, truly does it all. And some of the high notes you're hitting, Greg, are really high notes for him too. The main one is the gratitude part. And I'm just curious, you obviously you keep this journal. What brought you to doing the gratitude part in terms of recording that in your journal?
Well, this is something like the topic you were talking about earlier, right? People hear great ideas all the time. Do they actually implement them? Well, I was guilty of that too for a long time. And I have heard countless stories from countless people about the power of gratitude. And my godfather named his boat Gratitude. It's been like this word that's been in my life for a really long time, but it took me a while to finally get it. So one place this comes from is a guy named John Gordon, who's an author, a phenomenal author who writes books like The Power of Positive Leadership, The Energy Bus. He has a endless list, The Power of Positive Teams, a phenomenal writer who he was going through a really difficult time in his life. He tells the story much better than I do, but he was going through a really difficult time in his life, and he came across these gratitude walks. And he says in one of his books that it's impossible to feel gratitude and stress at the same time. So that's one thing. I had that in my mind for a while. And then I hear this other thing from my boss Michael Breed tells this great story about a priest that was in his life, a guy named Father Gelsomino, one of the smartest people he's ever met, according to Michael. He speaks 7 different languages. He is incredibly wise. And he says, if you're ever feeling down on yourself, you do something for somebody else. And you'll feel great. And so that it's kind of that giving mentality in the same way. So I was feeling, and then there's one more. This is phenomenal. And this actually led to the way that I format my gratitude list. So it's a gentleman by the name of Bob Proctor, who recently passed away. I may have mentioned him on the First Cut podcast.
Yeah, you have. That name's very familiar to me. Yeah,
yes.
Go on.
So he was, his messages are still incredibly powerful. He has an incredible story. Basically, a guy who grew up really poor in Canada, and learned from a mentor in a kind of obscure place about all this really positive energy and how it spreads and how it can manifest. And he ends up being this legendary self-help coach, teacher, and spreads the word through this company. And one of the exercises he has people do is to write down, he actually has them write down 10 things, but you format it like this: I'm so happy and grateful for blank. And you write down 10 things every day. So there was a time I was feeling a little maybe burnt out, maybe a little stressed. And I looked in the mirror. I said, this is ridiculous. Why are you feeling so stressed? You talk about golf for a living, right? Every day you go talk about golf. You analyze golf. You're studying, strokes gain statistics on the PGA Tour, and you talk about it. That's your work. Why are you stressed? And it didn't make any sense to me. So these things I just mentioned kind of ring in my head, and I say, okay. And this was right around the same time that I started to be really interested in habits. I'm not sure which led to the other, but anyway, I decide, well, I'm going to write in my journal, I'm going to write this Bob Proctor grateful list. So I tried it for a couple of days, and writing 10 things every day was too much. Which sounds terrible to say. How can you not come up with 10 things you're grateful for? But it started to feel like I was just trying to get to 10 instead of really thinking about it. So I altered my approach, and I wrote, I start the sentence, or it's actually a paragraph with "I'm so happy and grateful for," and then I write a paragraph, a little more in depth. It might be a page sometimes, it might be 2 pages sometimes, but I write a story about something that happened to me that I'm grateful for, something that meant a lot to me. It might be something that was a challenging situation that gave me an opportunity to exercise my willpower. Right there are countless things that you can get into in your gratitude list, but one of the things it does is it changes the entire perspective. So I was telling this story to a friend of mine the other day. My wife, who is home with my 2 boys all day, has this crazy day with them, and she's going out at night, and I get home late from work, and so there's this hectic turnover, and she has friends in town, and right when she's leaving, it's a Friday night, she says, oh, there's some laundry on the bed and there's no sheets on the bed. And I go in there, and there's a mountain of laundry on the bed, and a mountain. And I was at first like, "Are you kidding me? This is going to take me this is going to be the entire night." Right? I had a whole Friday night plan. I was going to put the boys to bed and do whatever I was going to do, and now I'm folding laundry. So I took that, and as I'm thinking about it, well, this is. And I can listen to a podcast, right? I can spend this time thinking, which is what I do when I'm doing dishes or folding laundry.
Yeah,
I like to just get into these thoughts, right? Anyway, I finish it, and I had some great reflecting thoughts, and my mood was totally different. But the reason that I went down that path in my own mind was because I knew I was going to write about it the next day. But what happened during the 2-hour process of folding and putting away all that laundry is what I thought that I was grateful for in the moment completely changed. I thought it was an opportunity to exercise willpower, like I said, but what I found was an opportunity to keep myself moving and keep myself thinking. And I came up with some great ideas. I had some great thoughts, listened to some great quotes, and it was a really moving day. It was a day I remember for months now. But I really believe that my perspective on that situation came from the journaling that I've done in the gratitude section.
Yeah, I think perspective is a good, like, there's a lot of buzzwords that I think people, if they're listening to this, and for the record, this is going to be on Sia Nejad Sports. This whole interview is going to be on sianejadsports.com. And I'm going to cut some of it up too, Greg, because there's a lot of pearls here, and there's a lot of like buzzwords that I think people can kind of take with them, whether it's habits or gratitude or perspective. I find myself getting lost in perspective too. There's one thing I want to go back to though, because earlier in this show, you talked about sort of your environment. In some way, you kind of referred to your environment and how you need to make sure. I think it was when you were talking about kind of placing things in your daily life.
Yep.
One thing that I've noticed, and for the record, I mean, Greg, you know my story. I was in. I mean, it's a long story, but just to shorten it, I was an attorney for 13 years. Then I did pharma sales for a little while I was doing media. Now I'm doing media full time. Like there's a lot of it's not even like a lateral move. To most people, they're like, wait, what are you even doing? Like none of that makes any sense. And for the record, that's just their definition of success might be different from mine. Their social norms might have been applied a little different than mine. But my point in saying this is as I was doing those things, I was receiving criticism. To this day, I receive criticism, or friends of mine that they're not outright criticizing me, but they're belittling me in a subtle way where I'm like, all right, they don't appreciate these goals that are valuable to me. So I need to sort of kind of dismiss them from my life. I don't need to actively say, hey, you're out of my life, but like, I don't need that sort of negativity in my life. And I just wonder, because that's so important to me. I've surrounded even my wife. I'm very supportive of everything I do. And that's great. By the way, she can be honest with me if she's not supportive. She happens to be supportive because she believes in me. There's you don't need a cheerleader necessarily. You just need somebody to kind of motivate you along the way. And there's the friends that I've surrounded myself with are of a similar ilk, where they're just like, yeah, you can do this. Like, this is all you. We'll keep going, push forward. And I just wonder, does that factor in any of the literature you've read, or any of in terms of your own experience? Because you've gotten pretty far in life in a lot of people's eyes as well. Is part of that surrounding yourself with people that are going to be supportive of you?
100%. And if there was a number greater than 100%, it would be that. It's absolutely critical in so many different ways. You think about it, there have been countless studies. If you want to lose weight, go hang out in places where people are fit, right? Hang out with fit people, and all of a sudden they will change. I've seen this in countless instances in my life, and my mentors happen to be of the same ilk as me. I've spent a lot of my life hanging around with people who are a little bit older. And so some of my tendencies are a little bit more old school. We act like the environment around us. But there's a really cool study. Well, it has a sad twist to it, but there was back in the Vietnam War, there was a shocking number of vets. Well, they were serving at the time, active military members who were heroin addicts. It was an appalling number. It was something like 30% of the troops in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. And so they realized that this is a big problem, and they started, the U.S. government wanted to track them when they got back and see what happened, and make sure that they had an eye on them, and, try to quell this problem. So when they assimilate back into society, we don't have this group of veteran heroin addicts running around, which makes a lot of sense. But what they found when they came back was really contrary to what the popular belief on addiction was. And they found that when they returned, it was a shocking number of these heroin addict veterans were no longer heroin addicts. They gave it up. And the theory is they gave it up because their environment changed. So they're in Vietnam. It's very easy. It's very accessible to get to. They don't have the responsibilities at home or the influences in their lives that they did growing up, who may hold them accountable, or who they may feel, let's say it's a parent, right? My dad wouldn't approve of this. Well, your dad's on the other side of the world. And all of a sudden your friends are doing it, that you're hanging around with, and you're in this group of heroin users, and it becomes very easy to get. But when you go back to an environment that does not operate that way, there's a barrier to get into that habit. Do you have to hide it? Do you have to do something that's out of the ordinary? It's too difficult to go and get it. So now what's stronger? Is it the addiction, or is it the process of getting and using heroin? And if you're doing it by yourself, are you enjoying it the way you did when you were doing it with with the people that you were, serving with? Does it solve the same problems for you? But the moral of that story is, this is one of the most, maybe, I can't tell you for sure, but one of the most addictive drugs in the world that we know of. And addicts are overnight losing their addiction because their environment changes. Now, I'm not saying that, this is a proven method for getting rid of addiction, but it's just, I think, to me, a really powerful story about how your environment can change your habits, how your environment changes the way you are, who you are, and how you talk to yourself, especially, which is so important.
I absolutely love that. And by the way, Greg, I don't know if you can see the comments, but the lead singer of the First Cut Pod is in here, backing up what you're saying, Greg.
All right.
Gigi Najad, for those of you that don't know, incredible voice, and usually she's got 4 songs that she sung for the First Cut Pod.
Yeah,
She says,
phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you. She's probably listening, so I'm sure she's thanking you silently right now. She says, drawing inspiration from those around you, environment matters 100%. And listen, here's the thing. Some of these points might be obvious, but those of you that are listening to this, ask yourself, well, how many people do you have around you that are not inspiring you, that are not motivating you in some way? It doesn't have to be overt motivation. It could be subtle. How many of them are holding you back for some reason because they're taking you away from your focus? They know what your focus is, but their focus is different, so they're taking you away from it. Maybe you play Madden with them instead of accomplishing your goal. You go to the bar with them 2 times a week instead of accomplishing your goal. Like, some of these people, if they just don't get your goals, maybe they don't need to be around you during that phase where you're trying to accomplish them. I just think that's a big deal.
It is, but this situation leaves you with a choice, and it's a difficult choice. The choice is, are you going to leave them? Right. You kind of exclude them from your friendship group. You say, hey, I don't need to be in that situation anymore. So you can leave them or you can lead them. And and this can be challenging, and it doesn't always work. But you can try to change some of those habits for the group. And it often only takes one person where, hey, instead of going to the bar on this one evening, let's go to let's go somewhere else, somewhere a little healthier, somewhere that kind of gets us more towards our goals. Maybe we can start going to the gym together. That's just an example. I'm not saying that that's exactly going to happen, but when one person changes the way that they speak and the way that they act, it can have a really powerful effect. Sometimes it can go the other way, and you can lose friends doing it, but sometimes it's worth trying to lead them in the right direction too.
No, I that's a really good point, actually, because that's kind of the glass half full answer, right? You can kind of bring them along with you, and maybe they don't want to come along with you, but at least you tried. I think that's actually a really good point. I mean, I think in most cases, you probably kind of know whether or not they're going to veer your direction or not, because their habits are so ingrained. But to your point, I think it's worth a try. And I'm not necessarily talking about a loved one. Hopefully the loved one is already on your side, like a wife or your significant other. But if they're not, then that's going to be somewhat of a problem. But even your friends, like, I think you can probably pull them along the way. Eric with another comment in here. Again, thank you for watching, Eric. We're going to bring you so much more. And Greg, I have to have you back on the show, because you are a content machine when it comes to this very subject that I want to talk about, like for the rest of time. Frankly, this is a subject that I think has such good application to people if they just listen to it and internalize it. But Eric says, firm believer of who you spend time with is who you become. So, Sia, have you become a great singer? Well, so here's the thing, Eric. It's an interesting comment. I will say this. I'm a pretty good basketball player, but if I hung out a lot with LeBron James, I probably wouldn't be as good as LeBron James. But clearly,
you'd be better than you are now.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. You don't want to hear my voice, Eric. Actually, you probably will. You know what? I'm going to do a duet with Gigi for the First Cut Pod. I really am. I play the guitar too. I don't think anybody really knows that, but she plays it way better than me. Her voice is way better than me. But we're going to collab. Speaking of collabing, I do want to ask you. So you've mentioned, I know you're on Sirius XM. Obviously, you're on the First Cut Pod. Can you just real quick tell us where we can find you on those platforms, but where else can we find you, if anywhere?
So I'll start with Sirius, because I mentioned it already. Sirius XM PGA Tour Radio. That's channel 92. And I'm on from 8 to 10 with Michael Breed. That show's called A New Breed of Golf. Mm-hmm. And then on the weekends, not the week, it's, Thursday and Friday. Occasionally, about, once or twice a month, I'll host a show called The Wrap, which is the post-game show. I've had you on that one, Sia. Mm-hmm. So, about every other week or so. It's not that scheduled, but I'll be on that show. And that varies depending on the event, but it's right after live PGA Tour coverage. So that covers Sirius. And then First Cut Podcast, of course. I'm on Mondays with you, Sia, for our DFS show. And then that podcast is available 6 days a week. Anywhere you get your podcasts, available on YouTube as well. And I typically will do one or two of the weekend shows, the round by rounds, like Friday or Saturday, and then I'll also do the Sunday recaps, and as I mentioned, the Monday recaps. And then last thing is CBS Sports HQ. I'm on there periodically. Michael Breed and I do a preview episode, and HQ also on CBS Sports Network. They have a spotlight show which airs on Wednesday nights, and we do a segment in that show as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. HQ is elite. I love that. Let me ask you this though, because we're talking about goals, and listen, you're very accomplished. And again, I don't know what your definition of success is. We all have different definitions of it. And maybe you've achieved the success that you have wanted, and you got your family around you, and that those are different, measures of just life experience and perspective and success. But with all that said, is there something Greg wants to do, something next level, something perhaps greater, or just something additional that maybe you are habit forming right now to accomplish?
Well, Sia, it's a very interesting topic, because as much as I read about this stuff and listen to this kind of stuff, it always seems like there's there has to be a new goal on the horizon. But as I reflect and write, I find that what I'm doing now is really in large part what I want to be doing. So I want to do a lot more of it. I want to raise the level of it. I want to I want to raise viewership. I want to raise the number of people that we can touch, because the ultimate goal for me is to help people. I want to help people enjoy the game of golf more. I want to help people play better golf. I want to help people think better. And in order to do that, I have to think better myself, and I have to employ a lot of these things. So for one, in my personal life, I want to improve in all these areas, largely so that I can help others do it as well. And those would be the key areas for me would be golf instruction, golf coaching, helping people enjoy the game of golf more, whether it's through fantasy or following the PGA Tour. Maybe they get some new analysis on a player, and they become a fan of this great game that has meant so much to me. So I want to help people in those regards. And the bigger the audience that I can develop and get to help me do that, the better. And lastly, stuff like this is so cool. And like I said, I think there's such a great connection to the game of golf and the game of life, and sport in general, and improvement in general. And so there's a merger there. And I don't know, maybe I can follow in your footsteps and start a website like you have here.
Well, I was actually going to ask you something. And by the way, when it comes to sports psychology, I'll tell you, Dr. Lillian Najad, my older sister, she's in the chat as well. And she shows her compliment, not just to me, but to yourself, Greg. She also says this. She says, the number one factor to build resilience, close, supportive, and positive relationships. Love all the topics you covered. Proud big sister. I'll tell you, Dr. Lillian Najad, cool. She's a psychologist, doctor, obviously, in Melbourne, Australia. And she actually has covered a lot of the sports psychology type stuff. She actually just launched her own app. She's going to be on this show. I'm going to ask her all kinds of questions about that. It's an app. You can put the name of it, Lillian, in the chat, because I'm forgetting it right now for some reason. But it's a really good app. Like I've actually used it in terms of like how to handle stress. And a lot of it is putting some of those thoughts down, that accountability factor that we talked about earlier. It's really a dynamic app. Greg, I'm going to send it over to you so you have an idea of what it is. But what I was going to ask you, Greg, and we have a lot of great guests coming on, and I'm going to interview, like, just in the next few weeks. Jonathan Coachman's coming on. I mentioned this.
Right, the coach.
It's like RG3 is going to come on. I've interviewed him before. I think he's going to come back. We've got David Meltzer is going to come on. This is all within the next few weeks, and many others. Maybe I'll get Rick on this show. But what I'd like to do after I get some of these sort of under my belt, Greg, I'd like you to until you have your own website doing this, you're such a wealth of information, like certainly more than me. I'd like you to co-host at least a show or two with me. Again, maybe down the line, maybe a month or two, we get somebody that perhaps is closer to you than me. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe it's a Michael Breed, maybe it's somebody in a space where you have a better connection to them than I do, and we could both kind of just ask these questions and give our opinions, but have that third person on a show. What do you think?
I would love to do it anytime you want. I'm all in. All you got to do is ask.
It's the Contain Your Brain app, by the way. Everybody go download that. It's at the App Store, wherever you get your apps. She's going to be on the show. She's going to talk about it more, but it's an incredible app. It's so practical. It has such great application to this day and time. Before I let you go, I do have to ask you a couple more questions. One is kind of silly. I just need to know. And the other one, maybe not so silly. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
It's delicious. But I'm going to say no.
Thank you. All right. So I'm taking a poll to pretty much every person I ask. I love pineapple. I love pizza. I don't want them mixed together.
All right.
You answered that correctly. We would have had to end it right there. But I think I only have one other thing for you. So, you mentioned gratitude, and it did kind of, bring something up to me, because there's been so many people that I'm sure have been influential to you along the way, that continue to be influential to you. So my question is, if there were 3 people that you could thank right now for molding you into the person you are today. They could be people that they could be people you've never met. They could be family members. They could be acquaintances, whatever it is. But if you could come up with 3 people that you just want to thank right now, who would they be?
Easy. So easy. And 3 is a great number. It would be my mom, first and foremost. I spent most of my upbringing with her, and by most, I mean literally almost all of it. Never missed a hockey practice of mine. Took me to school in the morning, or took me to the bus stop in the morning every day, and was home waiting for me when I got home, and was the most positive and supportive person you could ever have in your life. Just so incredibly positive. It's hard to even describe. So she would be number 1. My dad would be number 2. I'm sure you figured we were going somewhere like that, but another incredibly influential and positive figure in my life, a man who stands by his principles. He does things the right way, no matter what. He's actually an attorney as well, by the way. And lawyers take flack sometimes, in general, not individually, but the occupation of being a lawyer takes some heat sometimes. And all the things that I've heard in a negative sense about being an attorney is just the opposite of what I witnessed with my dad day in and day out. He's the most honest and helpful person that I've ever met, and another incredibly positive, incredibly supportive, incredibly smart and giving man who I've got to watch and just soak it all up. And I only wish I could have taken in more when I was growing up. And lastly would be my closest mentor and on the professional side and personal side too, and that would be Michael Breed. He's known for his golf instruction, known for his radio show and all these things. But what Michael does is he coaches minds, like a lot of the stuff that we've talked about tonight. He does so much of this work with people as well. And so I have watched him teach. I've watched him run his business. I've been his right-hand man for a very long time. And watching him go through the day-to-day life it's been an incredible learning environment. I've gotten to see kind of the behind the scenes of this world that I try not to take for granted, but it's a world people kind of dream to see. The connections with various companies and partners and great people that I've had a chance to meet through his mentorship and coaching, and many of the opportunities in my career come from him. So yeah, I would very sincerely thank my mom, my dad, and Michael Breed as well.
I absolutely love it. I think that's a really great way to end this show, with gratitude, which we spoke of throughout the show. Honestly, Greg, there were so many pearls in this show from you, and I hate to almost diminish them by referencing them as pearls, because I feel like that does diminish them a little bit. I feel like people really need to go back and listen to this, and I'll cut some of this up and post it, because I don't think people understand how helpful these practical tips are. Not from you per se, but from these books and from these podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is just, if you institute even just some of this, truly your life will change, and not just your life in terms of like how, like just your perspective, just everything I think will slowly change around you when you incorporate this stuff. So I appreciate you. You were truly the perfect first guest to have on this show. I mean, you truly were. And I'm so glad I got an opportunity. Listen, I work with you every week. But to get you in this context is awesome. And I'm super thankful for it. I'm genuinely thankful for you coming on to the show. And you're going to come back, obviously, as just a guest, but also as on a separate show, because I think we have more to kind of flush out. But I think as a co-host, for sure, I'd love to have you co-host with me and get an additional guest on here. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. I can't thank you enough for having me. I think what you're doing is so cool and so inspiring, and I hope it becomes, I hope it becomes exactly what you hope that it does. So thank you so much. And you mentioned this one other thing I want to just say lastly.
Yeah.
This stuff I've talked about it is nothing that I've invented. Like you said, right? This is all stuff that I've learned and I've applied, and I think that it can be really helpful for you as well. So I'm by no means an expert in any of these things. I'm just a guy who read something and tried it out and had some success with it. So and now all of a sudden, thanks to you, Sia, I had a place to share it. So I hope it can help you the way it helped me. And again, I think this is so cool, and I hope that it's helpful. That's the ultimate goal.
It's definitely helpful. And you may not call yourself an expert, but those that are informed are pretty darn close to experts, really across any field. I mean, if you choose to be informed, you're really choosing to become an expert on a topic and a subject. So whether you call it an expert or not, it's almost irrelevant. The fact that you have this information to give makes it so incredibly valuable. So Greg, thanks for coming on to the show. Everybody, SiaNajadSports.com. Listen, the website was just launched. It's been built out, but in a very kind of like beginner way. We're going to post these interviews. We're going to cut up interviews. I'm going to do video blogs. We're going to have obviously more guests that I'm going to interview just in the next few weeks. Some really heavy hitters that have a lot to say, just like Greg. So everybody go to SiaNajadSports.com if you want. But more importantly, just look out for these shows, these interviews that I'm going to do, because ultimately I think they have the chance to truly change my life, to change Greg's life, everybody in the chat, Dr. Lillian Najad's life, otherwise known as my sister, although she's incorporated a lot of this already. But if you don't believe your life can be changed by topics like this, then obviously this isn't for you. But if you do, then I think you should listen up every time we do something like this, because these will be the topics I will discuss on SiaNajadSports.com. Greg, thanks again, and everybody, we'll see you next time, probably next week.